"I'll kill the king myself," whispered the stable boy to the princess who loved him in secret. The stables of Highmoor Castle were nothing to behold at first glance. Timber walls dampened with moss, iron hinges browned with rust, and the endless smell of hay and leather and sweat. Yet within those humble confines, kingdoms of longing were born, and destinies were quietly reshaped. The princess came there not for the horses, not for the rattle of bridles or the brush of velvet muzzles against her hand, but for the brief miracle of escape. And it was there, among the shadows of the hayloft and the soft stamping of hooves, that she first saw him. He was only a boy to the rest of the world, bare-armed, earth-stained, his hair damp with labor. But to her, who had known only courtiers with perfumed words and hollow smiles, he was something altogether different. His name was Chaol. He spoke little, though his silences carried a strength greater than any polished verse sung in the palace halls. His eyes were not bright with ambition nor dulled by obedience. They were steady, dark as soil after rain, and unafraid to meet hers. The princess, Alara, was 17 that spring, an age gilded with expectations. She was spoken of as a prize. Her hand bartered in whispers, long before she could understand what it meant. Yet in the stable she was no one's prize. She was only a girl with wind in her hair, listening to the rustle of straw beneath her shoes, breathing the same air as a boy who never bowed unless duty demanded it. Their meetings were accidents at first. She wandered where her governess forbade, and he happened to be there, mending tack, soothing a restless mare, his shirt clinging to his back from honest work. She would watch him in stillness, drawn by something she could not name. And when he finally looked up, their gazes caught, held, lingered longer than courtesy allowed. A warmth flickered through her then, fragile as a candle flame but fierce in its insistence. The castle beyond was a gilded cage, every corridor echoing with expectation, every chamber crowded with whispers of alliances and heirs. Her father, the king of Highmoor, was a man carved of iron and suspicion. He measured worth in bloodlines and battlefields, never in tenderness. Alara had grown among marble and cold silks, starved of warmth though surrounded by grandeur. In Chaol's presence she tasted something that felt dangerously like freedom. She returned often. She learned the names of the horses, though she cared more for the stories. Chaol told of them, the stubborn stallion, who had thrown every rider but bowed his head for a child, the mare who refused to eat unless her stablemate was near. He spoke of beasts as though they bore souls, and when he spoke, Alara felt that perhaps she bore one too, hidden beneath brocade gowns and jeweled coronets. It was never safe. A princess seen with a stable boy was scandal enough. A princess who lingered, who smiled, who dared to brush straw from his sleeve. Such whispers could bring ruin. Yet the risk was a balm, for every forbidden glance stitched her heart more firmly to his. One night, in the hush after a banquet, Alara slipped away, her slippers sinking into dew-laden grass as she crept to the stables. The moon lay pale across the roof, the windows glowing faintly with lamplight. Inside, Chaol was alone, running a brush down the flank of a dappled gray. He turned at the sound of her breath, surprise flickering across his face, but no rebuke came. Instead, a stillness passed between them, thick as velvet, until she thought she could not draw air for the weight of it. She did not speak, nor did he. Words felt too fragile, too clumsy for what swelled in her chest. Instead, she stepped closer, the scent of hay and horseflesh filling her senses, the warmth of the lantern casting his features in gold. For the first time, she felt the pulse of her own blood like a drumbeat, alive, urgent. He set down the brush. The horse shifted and blew softly, as if excusing itself from the moment. Chaol's gaze did not waver. Alara, princess of a realm, daughter of a man who counted enemies like coins, stood trembling before a boy who had nothing to give but his presence, and found it worth more than all her father's treasure. Their love began there, not in proclamations or vows, but in the simple daring of presence. Each secret meeting stitched together a tapestry of yearning, glances. In the lantern light, laughter hushed against the snort of horses, the briefest brush of fingers when passing a bridle. To the world they were strangers, yet in the stables they belonged to no one but each other. But shadows lingered even in the warmth of their stolen moments. Chaol knew he was nothing in the eyes of the court. A servant, replaceable, invisible. Yet in Alara's eyes, he saw something dangerous, hope. And hope, when tangled with love, has toppled kingdoms. One evening, as thunder gathered over the hills and rain lashed the stable roof, Alara confessed in a trembling whisper what her father had told her. She was to be promised soon to a king far older, a man whispered to be cruel, one who crushed rebellions with iron claws and silenced dissent with fire. The match would secure borders, her father said, and elevate Highmoor's power. It was a union sealed not by love but by fear. Cale's hands stilled on the reins he was coiling. For the first time his eyes broke from hers, shadowed with something darker than silence. He turned away, and in the flicker of lantern light, Alara saw his jaw tighten, his shoulders harden with something more dangerous than grief. She reached for him, but he stepped back. The storm outside cracked and rumbled, as though the heavens themselves warned of what would follow. And in that instant, though unspoken, a vow was born in the hollow of Cale's heart. If the princess he loved was to be given to cruelty, then cruelty itself must be undone. Alara did not hear it yet, but she would soon. One day, in the hush of night, when her tears had dampened the straw and her heart had nearly broken, Cale would lean close, his voice a shadow against her ear, and whisper the words that would change everything. "I'll kill the king myself." For now, though, their love remained fragile, hidden beneath the beating of hooves and the rolling thunder. Yet the storm had begun, and nothing, not crowns nor fathers, nor kings, could stop what had been set into motion. The weeks that followed the storm brought no calm. Summer swept over Highmoor, gilding the battlements in light, painting the fields in green and gold. To the court it was a season of triumph, treaties signed, alliances secured, borders strengthened. But within Alara's heart, it was a season of dread. The betrothal was announced, with a feast that spilled wine across marble floors and filled the hall with laughter that felt hollow as wind. Through empty corridors, courtiers raised goblets to her beauty. Envoys praised her father's cunning, and her name was tied in threads of gold to that of a man she had never met, though his reputation preceded him like a shadow. King Althar of Draven. He was twice her age and thrice her cruelty, a ruler whose reign was sung not in hymns but in dirges. It was said he had hanged his own advisers when they dared to question him, and that the streets of his capital smelled forever of ash from villages burned in punishment. His armor was always black, his eyes as sharp as the blade he carried even to banquets. He was a man to be feared, not loved, and he had been promised Alara's hand. The night the announcement was made, Alara sat in her chamber long after the candles guttered. The echo of cheers still clung to the walls, as if the stones themselves rejoiced at her binding. She pressed her hands to her face, her tears scalding against her palms. She thought of the cage closing, the walls tightening. She thought of Cale, and Cale thought of her. That very night he found her in the stables, drawn as surely as a moth to flame. She stood barefoot in the straw, her gown of silk stained with tears, her hair unbound. He looked at her, and felt something twist deep within him, something that had been growing since the first day. Their eyes had met. He stepped close, and in the hush between them, he finally gave voice to the vow that had already taken root. "I'll kill the king myself." The words hung in the air like a blade unsheathed. Alara's breath caught. She stared at him, torn between terror and a wild, impossible hope. She knew the cost of such words: treason, death, the crushing of not only his life but all who dared to love him. And yet in her heart a spark flared. For the first time since her betrothal had been announced, she felt the faintest tremor of power, not in crowns, not in treaties, but in the sheer defiance of a stable boy's vow. She wanted to beg him not to speak again, to protect himself from the folly of such rebellion. But her lips betrayed her. Instead, she whispered back, "If you do this, Cale, you do it for us." From then on, the air between them carried a new weight. Their secret meetings were no longer only for love's sake, but for the weaving of a dangerous plan. Cale began to listen to rumors, to note the comings and goings of messengers, to mark which guards were loyal to the king and which drank too much to care for duty. The boy who had once known only horses now began to know the faces of men who whispered discontent, who spoke in hushed voices of freedom, who dreamed of a kingdom where cruelty did not reign. And Alara, though bound by chains of silk, became his accomplice. In her chamber she overheard things, courtiers careless with secrets in the presence of a girl they thought voiceless. She learned the dates of visits, the gifts sent to her father by Althar, the precise hour when the cruel king would arrive to claim her. Each detail, shared beneath the shadows of the stables, became a thread in the tapestry of rebellion. Still, it was not easy. Every meeting was a risk. Her father's eyes grew sharper, his temper shorter. He suspected something, though not yet the truth. And always the shadow of King Althor loomed larger. At last the day came when Alara saw her betrothed with her own eyes. The court gathered in the great hall, banners unfurled, trumpets blaring as the doors opened to admit him. He strode in like a storm-given flesh, broad-shouldered, armored in black steel chased with gold, a cruel smile etched across his lips. His gaze swept the hall like a scythe cutting through wheat. And when it landed on Alara, she felt her blood turn cold. He bowed to her father, but when he took her hand, he did not bow to her. His grip was iron, bruising, and though he smiled for the watching court, his eyes promised only possession. That night, when the torches burned low and the castle slept, Alara ran to the stables. Her heart pounded like a drum of war as she fell into Chaol's arms. She told him of Althar's gaze, his touch, the cruelty that emanated from him like heat from fire. She trembled, and Chaol held her, his own heart hardening to stone. In that moment, the vow he had spoken became more than words. It became destiny. Chaol began to gather others. Stable hands who had grown tired of servitude, soldiers whose families had suffered under the crown, peasants who had lost homes to the taxes and wars demanded by kings. They were few and weak compared to armies, but they carried the fire of desperation, and fire once lit can spread faster than steel can quench it. Each night Alara and Chaol spoke of what might come. She dreamed of a life beyond the castle walls, where they could walk openly, hand in hand, beneath skies unshadowed by crowns. He dreamed of a kingdom unshackled from cruelty, where even a stable boy might rise not by blood but by the strength of his heart. Yet beneath those dreams lay a truth neither dared to voice, that the road to freedom would be paved in blood. As summer waned and autumn's chill crept into the air, preparations for her marriage to King Althar grew. The court buzzed with anticipation, blind to the undercurrent of rebellion stirring in its depths. Dresses were sewn, jewels chosen, feasts planned. And in the shadows of the stables, a boy and a girl clung to each other, knowing that time was running short. The night before Althar's return to claim his bride, Chaol pressed his forehead to Alara's. His voice was rough, low, edged with fire. When he comes, it will not be to take you. It will be to meet his end. Alara closed her eyes. She wanted to believe. She needed to believe. For without that belief, there was only despair. The stage was set. A cruel monarch riding toward Highmoor, a princess bound in golden chains, and a stable boy with a vow burning in his chest like a brand. The world had not yet heard the clash of rebellion. But in the silence before dawn, destiny waited, sharp and unyielding as the blade. Chaol now sharpened by candlelight. The king was coming, and Chaol was waiting. Dawn broke heavy the day King Althar returned to Highmoor to claim his bride. The air itself seemed to hold its breath, thick with waiting. Clouds lay low, pressing against the turrets of the castle, and the banners of Highmoor drooped as though weary with dread. From the village below came the distant toll of bells, summoning the people to witness what the court proclaimed a triumph, but what Alara knew to be her undoing. Within the stables, Chaol tightened the strap of his jerkin, his hand steady despite the storm inside him. Around him gathered a small knot of men and women, stable hands with pitchforks, grooms with knives, a pair of soldiers who had once sworn loyalty to Alara's father, but whose children had starved beneath his taxes. Their faces bore no illusion of victory, only the hard resolve of those who have nothing left to lose. Chaol looked at each of them, then at the girl who had risked everything to stand here with him. Alara was pale, her gown already laid out in her chamber for the ceremony, yet her eyes shone with a light no silks could outmatch. She was still the princess, still the jewel of her father's pride. But in this moment she was also his heart, his reason, his impossible dream. Today, Chaol whispered, though the words carried like thunder to all who listened, the king will fall. The plan was simple, because simplicity was all they had. Althar would arrive in the great hall, demanding ceremony and tribute. The court would bow, her father would toast, and the princess would be paraded like spoils. But within the crowd, among servants and soldiers, Chaol and his small band would move, hidden in plain sight. A knife at the right moment, a distraction, a spark, and the king's life would be cut short before he could claim what was never his. It was madness, treason, almost certain death, but it was also the only chance. Elara pressed Cale's hand once, a fleeting touch before duty pulled her away. She would have to walk into the hall as though nothing stirred within her, as though her heart were not breaking with every step. But she carried his vow in her chest like armor. "I'll kill the king myself." When the hour came, the castle thrummed with anticipation. Trumpets blared, their notes sharp enough to split the air. Hooves clattered on stone as Althar's retinue poured through the gates, black-armored knights, banners stitched with the emblem of the Draven wolf, their faces hard and cold. And at their center rode Althar himself, a figure of darkness against the pale day, his crown glinting like a weapon. In the great hall, nobles lined the walls, their jewels glittering, their whispers like the rustle of dry leaves. Elara stood at her father's side, every inch the dutiful daughter, though her pulse thundered in her ears. She saw Cale at the far end of the hall, disguised among the grooms leading the horses from the king's train. Their eyes met only for an instant, but it was enough. The world narrowed to that one glance, that one breath between them. Althar strode forward. He bowed to the throne, but when he turned to Elara, his smile was thin and cruel. He took her hand, pressing his lips against it in a parody of reverence. His grip was hard, bruising, and his whisper burned her ear. "Soon you will kneel." And then the moment broke. A cry rose from the edge of the hall. A servant stumbled, spilling a flagon of wine across the floor. Althar turned his head, his smile fading into a snarl, and Cale moved. The blade flashed, small and quick, drawn from beneath his jerkin. He lunged, every muscle coiled with the fury of years of silence, of servitude, of love denied. Time seemed to fracture, the court gasping, Alara's breath catching, the king's eyes widening as the stable boy's knife found its mark. It struck true. Blood bloomed dark against Althar's armor. He staggered, roaring, his hand clawing for his sword. Chaos erupted, guards shouting, nobles fleeing, steel ringing against steel. Cale stood firm, his face lit with a fire that was part triumph, part sorrow. He had struck the blow no one else dared, but the king did not fall, not yet. Althar's rage was a storm. With a bellow, he ripped the blade from his side and hurled Cale back with a gauntleted fist. The boy crashed against the stone, breath knocked from his body. Around him, the small band of rebels fought, overwhelmed, yet unyielding. Elara screamed, the sound tearing from her throat like a bird from a snare. She broke from her father's side, rushing toward Cale, heedless of the guards. Her father shouted, her name echoing in fury, but she did not care. She reached him as he struggled to rise, his face pale yet resolute. "Cale," she whispered, her hands catching his. He looked up at her, blood at the corner of his mouth, his breath ragged. "For you," he said, and somehow, even now, his voice was steady. Althar staggered forward, sword drawn, eyes blazing with murder. "Stable rat," he spat, raising the blade to finish what had begun. But he had forgotten Elara. The princess who had been raised to bow, to smile, to obey, stepped before Cale. Her eyes blazed, her hands trembling not with fear but with fury, and in that instant something within her broke free. She seized the fallen dagger, the very blade that had wounded the king, and as Althar's sword descended, she drove it upward with all the strength of her body, burying it deep into the cruel monarch's chest. The hall fell silent. Althar's eyes went wide, his mouth parting in shock, blood bubbling at his lips. For the first time, the cruel king looked not fearsome but human, small, mortal, undone. He staggered, his blade clattering to the floor, and with a final gasp, he crumpled at Elara's feet. The crown slipped from his head, rolling across the stone until it came to rest in a pool of his own blood. The rebellion was born in that moment, not from speeches or banners, but from the act of a princess who had chosen love over duty, and a stable boy who had dared to strike at a king. But victory was not without cost. Guards surged, seizing Cale, dragging him from Elara's arms. Her father's voice thundered, condemning, enraged. He saw not a savior, not a boy who had slain a tyrant, but a traitor who had dared to touch his daughter, dared to spill blood beneath his roof. Elara fought, begged, cried out, but her words fell against walls of iron. Cale was dragged away, his eyes never leaving hers. In them she saw no fear, only the same vow that had carried him this far. For you. That night, Highmoor was a kingdom changed. Althar was dead, his armies thrown into disarray, the treaty broken. Whispers spread like wildfire of the princess who struck down a king, of the stable boy who lit the spark. Songs would be sung, though never in the way the court intended. And though Kale's fate was sealed in chains, though Alara's tears fell like rain against her pillow, their love had already become legend. A legend that no prison, no crown, no decree could erase. For in the shadows of the stables a vow had been spoken. "I'll kill the king myself," whispered the stable boy to the princess, who loved him in secret. And in the end, together, they did.